Okay, perfect. So thank you and welcome. Thank you for attending today's proposals for resilient communities. My name is Nick Tan, and I will be your host for today. I am hosting this session from Mill Bay on Vancouver Island, BC, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm on the traditional territories of the Malahat First Nations. So the purpose of this session is to showcase proposals relating to wage equality, UNDRIP, Indigenous rights, and gun control. So today we have 3 presenters, and each presenter will have 20 minutes to discuss their proposal, answer any questions that they may have, and to discuss any friendly amendments that you may want to suggest. So while they're speaking, I would just ask you to mute yourself during the presentation just to avoid any background noise. If you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the chat as well, and I'll collect them for response by the presenters. At the end of each presentation, I'd like to run an anonymous poll just to gauge how you would vote. You don't have to participate, but your response is very helpful. I will be sharing the results with just that particular presenter in strict confidence, and it's very helpful for them to get that kind of feedback right away. And then after all the presentations have been done, I will be briefly discussing the voting process and what are the next steps for you. So before I ask all of the presenters just to quickly, in just a moment, introduce themselves and just give a sense of the proposal that they're having, does anybody here have any questions about what I've just talked about? No, perfect. All right, so we have Ian, Lorraine, and myself as a presenter today. So Ian, perhaps we can start with you and you can just introduce yourself and just let people get a sense of what you're going to be talking about.
Sure, thanks so much for this, Nick. So my name's Ian Soutar. I am currently on Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory in the nation's capital here, and I am I've been involved with the Green Party since about 2015. I served on federal council for a couple of years, and I worked in the Green Party head office until the pandemic hit as a mobilizer. I see some familiar faces and I see some new people, but I'm very happy to be amongst fellow Greens once again. And my policy today is going to be about maximum wage. I mean, well, the name will be up for debate, but otherwise, I'm looking forward to sharing it.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Ian. Lorraine, so if you can introduce yourself and your proposal just really briefly. And by the way, congratulations. I believe that you were just endorsed by Elizabeth May for party president. So is that correct?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'm sorry, it just took me a few minutes to find my camera. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Nick, so much for hosting this session. I am coming to you from unceded Algonquin territory. It is the home of my ancestors, so it's good to be here, surrounded by their spirits. And I would like to just take a minute to give thanks for this day, and thanks for all of you who are spending time on these important policy proposals on a Sunday. So I'm affiliated with the Green Party since 2008, and I have been the Indigenous Affairs critic for 12 years. And in the 12 years, I've been working away at a suite of policy proposals, most of which are based on the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and which are relevant to important issues of today, such as, poverty. We have a policy motion that's specific to Indigenous women to eliminate poverty that was spurned out of the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's report. So our policies are current to the issues as they emerge, but also rooted in the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People. So thank you, Nick, and thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks, Lorraine. And finally, myself. So my name is Nick Tan. I'll be your third presenter for today. I've been a longtime voter for the Green Party. I've been a member for about 4 years, and starting in October, this was really my first chance to get more involved with the party other than just voting. My day job, I am a government auditor, so critiquing the design and implementation of public policy is literally my day job. And today I'll be talking about a proposal called Safe and Accountable Firearms Ownership and Usage. So it's essentially a structural change to how gun control is done in Canada in a way that separates licensed firearms owners from criminals that nobody likes, and to create two separate structures that will allow two different entities to focus on the needs of both groups. And so with that, Ian, if you are ready, what we can do is I can pass the mic over to you, and I'll just start a timer. So each presenter will have about 20 minutes each. And as we get closer to the 20-minute mark, I'll just kind of wave or just interject just to let you know you have 1 or 2 more minutes left, if that's okay. Fantastic. So you have the floor, sir.
Super. Thanks so much, Nick. So policy today I have brought forward is currently titled maximum wage. But although I have been very clear throughout the entire process, that's the name, that's the part that's most up for like any friendly amendment towards the name. That would be where it's coming at, because I know that that's going to be a huge selling point. But essentially, I got this from the Green Party of England and Wales. They've had it in their policy book for over a decade now, and it's nice and simple and not associated with direct numbers, and boils down to that no person working within a particular organization should be making more than 10 times the amount of the lowest paid worker within that organization. So it doesn't say you can't make $10 million a year, but if you're making $10 million a year, then your lowest paid employees will be making $1 million a year. So this is essentially a wealth tax of sorts, but rather than diving into nitpicky numbers and so forth, that will always be changing, and it could be based on so many different things. Nice general policy principle. As I say, the name is definitely up for debate. I'm not great at the naming of the things, but I think the only concern I've heard so far about it is around the concept of capital flight, where say, oh, I don't like this policy, so I'm going to leave. But that policy still applies to money leaving the country as well. So sure, take your money, but make sure that the other people in your organization are getting paid fairly along that way as well. That's about it. I'm happy to take any questions or comments about it.
Ian, I actually have a question. So I believe you mentioned that the Scottish Greens have this policy. What do they call it?
For them, it's the Green Party of England and Wales, and it's called maximum wage there. I say the names up for debate because I had posted it on Facebook however many months ago, and it was very polemic.
Right.
Don't call it that because da 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 da. But I think when I had put the motion forward, it was, I think, right after the Liberals had struck down a wealth tax for, I think, their own paychecks as well. So.
Yeah, I guess good morning, everybody. Kim Hughes here from Shawnigan Lake, which is in Coast Salish territory, primarily the Cowichan tribes. I guess what I would like to see, Ian, if that policy exists, is if you could put up a slide. I'm not asking you necessarily to have to do it right now, but if you're doing other presentations or if you're doing something for your own web, to put up a slide of what that policy in England and Wales looks like.
Oh, it's pretty much the same one line of
Is it? Okay.
as presented. I think I've taken it verbatim from them as within the so it's listed on the ballot as such.
Okay.
Maximum wage, and the wording is, I think it's just one line of that no person working within an organization will make 10 times more than the lowest paid worker within that organization.
Okay.
Great. And so Kate, maybe you can ask your question, and then right after Lorraine, you can ask your question for Ian. Kate, you're muted. Can you unmute? Sorry, don't want you to lose your train of thought. Thanks.
The old Zoom problem. Have you given any thought to contract workers? Because so often corporations will just contract out work and then they say, oh, they're not working for us.
Good point.
I think that's a very valid concern. I don't think that this policy has the capacity to wrap around all of that. I think that for the most part, there are, I think, plenty of organizations that we can start by tackling with this policy. And then with respect to contract workers, I would probably call in someone a little more experienced than myself. I should also note that this policy was put forward via the Young Greens of Canada. So there was a package of policies that we had put together, and this was the one I was just in charge of. So it's it didn't come totally as my brainchild, but this was, Ian, you can do this. Okay, yes.
And Lorraine, do you have a question for Ian?
Oh, it's not a question. I think because voting has started, it's probably too late, but was there consideration for calling it fair wage?
I think that was a potential that came up. There, as I say, that's fair wage sounds actually very friendly in my mind. I think the biggest fit was I didn't want it to have that. I'm not sure what happens to the policy afterwards. Because I haven't put forward this kind before, but I didn't want the legislators to be stuck with something that they thought was untenable.
Right. Well, I think, yeah, in the past, I mean, we would have an opportunity to maybe workshop and make friendly amendments as suggestions, but I guess in this process, everything is going forward as submitted.
I think we'll get when it hits the AG or BGM that's where that would pop in, I think.
Okay,
But,
so is it something you would consider accepting it as an amendment, Ian?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I would just say whatever the feel for the room is around name. I like that. If I were in charge of making names for things, we would not do very well on a comms side.
Sorry, I just accidentally paused screen sharing. Sorry, I don't know what just happened with my. Can you guys see the slide again that has Ian's proposal?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I have no idea what happened. And sorry, I just interrupted somebody. I couldn't see who was talking.
Well, I was just going to jump in on the end of Lorraine's suggestion. And what about combining it and calling it fair maximum wage policy?
Yeah, I think I imagine the shift towards one or the other. I think if there were concern about how the public would react, it might be around the word maximum, even if. But
well, fair is kind of a modifier, right? It still gets the idea that you're still addressing the idea of the maximum wage, but by calling it a fair maximum wage, it lets people know that, you know, I don't know, we're sort of more it just makes it more agreeable, I think.
Mm-hmm. As I say, that any name recommendations, I'm sure we'll happily see on the floor. I hope we'll get something catchy or catchier than just maximum wage.
Something more green,
Mm-hmm.
sensual, maybe. Yeah.
I just wanted to read a comment, so I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Jeannie. Perfect. All right. So Jeannie made a comment that says, I think the name maximum wage is fine. This is a really good policy, which I will support. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Jenny.
I can see Michael is waving his hand, and Shell. Sorry, I didn't see who was first, but How about this? Shell, I see your hand is up, and then Michael, we'll let you talk right after. Thanks.
Sure.
Hi, thanks. I don't know exactly how it works, but just hoping that this policy would actually capture situations wherein an organization that the head or the head people are taking stock options, or there's other things going on other than cash flow of salaries.
I believe that's the intention, the spirit of it, the value of the person, not necessarily like, I mean, if people start shifting into Bitcoin as well, I would hope that applies to wherever or wherever a person considers their wealth. So yes, I should hope that applies to stocks or other type things. Ideally, we won't see the people or the rich millionaires or billionaires, for goodness sake, trying to dodge through technicalities like that.
And there's shares in the company, and there's other ways that value is given for being there, and it could get very difficult to try and enforce. And what you just said now is there's huge numbers of lawyers who make a lot of money organizing these ways to dodge and get around the rules. So of course that dodging will occur.
Yeah, I think that's the part of the
intention.
intention with sort of broadly described policy like this, is to try and capture as much of it as we can. And this, well, what about this? Sure, yes, let's take it. Where's the money? Let's get the money to the people.
Great, thanks. And Michael, you had a question?
Yes, so Ian, I'm just wondering if you can elaborate. You mentioned briefly that there's been a question, I guess, what would the result of this policy being actually implemented across Canada be on organizations in terms of how they would operate and the potential loss of a lot of, mental capital from management people and things like that. So I'm not saying I think it's an issue that we would need to keep in mind. How would you, have the other Green parties elaborated on this at all about how they might manage that process?
I haven't seen it taken further than just a policy line from, I think maybe the New Zealand Greens might also have something similar to this, but I don't think anyone has brought it forward enough to see what implementation will actually shake out like. The German Greens are the only people I can think of off the top of my head where if they implemented a policy, we could see how that looks right away. But as far as the technicalities go, I can't speak to that with confidence, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we also had two other comments. So I'll just read them together. And you might want to comment. So the first one says, maybe later we can have a proposal to ban the stock option and bonus scams. And then the second comment is, are there any organizations that are currently doing this?
Gosh, I should be Googling that right now, actually. I don't know that that's the case, but I think I'm gonna whip open my laptop right now.
Oh, we had somebody mention in Spain, presumably a company called Mondragon. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But...
Mondragon.
Mondragon.
Mondragon, thank you.
It's a huge network of co-ops.
Oh, and they use 6 times. So yes, there are great. Thank you so much for people helping out on this. That's great. Go team. I'm sure it must be doable because people are doing it, and also there's at some point rampant wealth inequality is going to need to get curbed.
Okay, fantastic. Are there any other questions? Oh, Kim, you have another question?
Well, just a quick comment to Ian. I'm so impressed and pleased to see that it came from the Young Greens. And I'm just wondering, when like these policies, did you guys as a cohort, did you not identify that your policies were coming from Young Greens? Because I think in people's minds that maybe makes it a difference to want to support you.
So there were two directions as far as how they could be submitted were going. So I think there needed to be a minimum of, it was a number larger than Young Greens that we had together for the policy discussions that we had. And so I think, and there was, I think this was, there had been plans to have the convention much sooner than it currently has been set. And so at the time it was, we were directed by, well, not direct, it was recommended by the governance team to submit them as individuals because we had the capacity to get them all through immediately in that respect. But yes, that if we had gone the other route, it's not clear that it would have been able to be submitted like that. But ideally, in the future, we will be able to have it done like that with ample time. I agree that it holds a little different kind of clout for sure to say this is from Young Green.
And also it just I don't know, it has a good mood, it has a good feel to it, and I think we all need to feel good that and to know that there's enthusiasm in the ranks coming up from Young Greens, that it helps us all, especially when we have times like now when we're challenged by other stuff, to know that the party's not going anywhere because there's Young Greens out there that are carrying the torch, you know. So maybe that's something we want to propose. I don't, for the next round of policy proposals, is that we actually recognize that a bank can come from the Young Greens as a separate entity.
Yeah, I will shoot a message off to the current co-chairs of the Young Greens, and since they also sit on federal council, and I think that's something that they can push through staff or goodness, whatever's happening there right now. But
when the timing is right.
yes. I agree, though. That's very true. And for what it's worth, we in the discussions we had, I think we had some 20 or something different policies from the Young Greens, and we decided to put forward 5 as a group, and this one was rated the highest, or with the most interest.
Yeah, nice.
Which is cool. The Young Greens are interested in financial policy.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Okay. So with that, this is not your only opportunity to interact with Ian. At the end of the proposal, I will be looping back to all the presenters and just having a bit of a very, very brief open floor where they can throw in any final remarks, and you can ask any final questions. Also, I will be running this meeting a little bit longer than the scheduled time. So once I stop recording, there'll be a bit of time afterwards to ask any other questions if something pops up. So Ian, if it's okay, can I run the poll? And just you're going to see a pop-up, and I'm going to launch it right now. So what you have is you can vote green, I support this proposal; yellow, I would like to see certain amendments; yellow, I would like more information; red, I do not support this proposal; or abstain, I will not vote on this proposal. So if you care to lodge your vote, what you choose, it will definitely give some very, very insightful feedback for Ian. So we have almost everybody voting. I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds just to collect any last votes. And perfect. So I'll end that poll. And again, this will just be shared with Ian. So I won't be sharing the results right now, but they're very positive. So with that, thank you very much, Ian, for your presentation. And now what we can do is go to Lorraine. So when you are ready, I will just start the timer, and you'll have 20 minutes and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. So I'm sorry, but I did not prepare a slide. And I hope, oh good, everyone can see So the proposal is to align Canada's constitution with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. At the moment, we know that Bill C-15, which is supposed to incorporate Canada's incorporate UNDRIP into Canadian law in the context of the Canadian Constitution, it's problematic because the Constitution is already deficient. So it would be a disservice to the principles within UNDRIP to try to implement UNDRIP within the context of Canada's Constitution. So I think at the last, excuse me, at the last convention, we passed a motion to repudiate the doctrine of discovery. And the doctrine of discovery, if everyone knows, is foundational to Canada's Constitution. And it is a recommendation that has been around for a long time. It actually predates the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it's been in discussion, you know, as long as I can remember, at least for 40 years within Indigenous circles. Canada's Constitution already defines Indigenous people as being First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. So it's deficient in that it doesn't actually name the nations, but it classifies First Nations in accordance with the Indian Act, which is limiting because the criteria for Indigenous citizenship in First Nations is established by Canada, and it is not, it's got nothing to do with self-determination of original nations. So the problem is trying to fit the principles of a nation-to-nation position within Canada's Constitution. If we go back in time to, I guess, the constitutional talks in the 1980s, when Section 35 was added to Canada's Constitution, there was a lot of discussion at the time about self-government for Indigenous people. And the Meech Lake Accord at the time would have afforded an opportunity for First Nation communities to begin self-government work. So deciding on their governance systems and their citizenship requirements. We're so far along from the Meech Lake Accord, and it's really disappointing to see that not more has happened in the realm of self-government or self-determination for Indigenous people. So because the Green Party of Canada has committed to a nation-to-nation relationship, at this point in time, we do not have a nation-to-nation relationship because Indigenous communities are not organized as nations. And by nations, if you would consider the size of the Anishinaabe Nation, as compared to the First Nation Indian Act band councils that are set out by the Indian Act, there's quite a difference in terms of a power base or being able to leverage any kind of action in a negotiation. So it creates a disparate, inequitable relationship between Canada and First Nation communities. So I think that's the short of it. I mean, of course, this is building on current policy of the Green Party moving forward. So we recognize that when we say we have to repudiate the doctrine of discovery, in essence, what we're really saying is we have to amend Canada's Constitution to make room so that Canada can fulfill its treaty obligations and that Canada is able to deal on a nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous people. So I don't know what it would look like because I don't write prescriptive policy proposals, but I'm just saying it has to be done, that Canada's Constitution has to enable the principles of UNDRIP and not disempower UNDRIP or the principles in it. So I think I'll leave it there. if anyone, I mean, there are so many pieces to this, I wouldn't know where to start. You know, I mean, even if we just simply talk about self-determination and having the ability to define your own citizenship and what that would look like. So these are principles within UNDRIP. And there's a lot of, I think, a lot of information about the way forward for building these new relationships that come out of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which you don't hear about anymore. So, and then, you know, people have been talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations, which are, you know, which have come out of the residential school inquiry. But I think that RCAP is a much more robust set of recommendations with really bold moves to actually, you know, send us forward. So I'll take any questions.
Well, oh, Connie, you put your hand up. And you're muted, sorry. Could you unmute yourself? Thanks.
Sorry, I don't put my video on because I have like cats and dogs and just a lot of distraction to the speaker. Thank you, Lorraine, for putting this forward. I'm wondering if you know of any other organizations that might have adopted this either provincially or at a municipal level, this type of concept in Canada to adopt the UNDRIP principles?
Well, I mean, Bill C-15 proposes to, you know, to incorporate UNDRIP principles, but the Constitution will limit, Canada's Constitution will actually limit its ability to fulfill the full intent of UNDRIP.
And will our Constitution limit our ability as well?
In Canada?
At the Green Party.
Oh, well, this is talking about constitution, the Canadian Constitution. It's not talking about GPC Constitution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, Connie, your question, it leads exactly into the comment I was about to make. I work for the BC government and they have what's called the UNDRIP Act. We just call it UNDRIPA. And it's a very short act, which just simply says, we will implement the principles of UNDRIP. That's it. Very small amount of legislation leads to huge action. I'm part of a subcommittee that deals with reconciliation and GPA plus. So identity characteristics of people to make things more inclusive. And I can say that without that kind of embedding of UNDRIP into legislation, you won't really see much change. Now I'm starting to see a lot of action, both at a local level as well as government-wide. People really want to implement UNDRIP, and now they have that authority to go ahead with it because we have to. So I think this is a very relevant proposal.
Well, I think when you look at the Canadian Constitution, there's a division of powers that assigns control over resource development to the provinces, and it's exclusive to the provinces. And this has been a problem for Indigenous communities because they've been on the outside of all resource development, never able to engage. So, you know, my experience coming up through the 1990s was, you know, just seeing at every turn, whenever there was resource development, there were never Indigenous people engaged with permits or licenses to extract or develop. So, you know, this has been a gaping hole in the Constitution. Section 35 is the federal government's responsibility to deal with Indians and lands reserved for Indians. And Section 97 gives care and control over all the natural resources to the provinces without consideration for Indigenous rights to any of those resources. So that's, you know, if you look at our experience with Wet'suwet'en and other conflicts, you see the province trying to exercise its jurisdiction over resource development without consideration for Indigenous rights. So so at some point, the provinces have to accept responsibility to implement, and acknowledge and recognize Indigenous rights. And it can only come from the constitutional amendments, because the provinces abide by the Constitution, and the powers that are vested in the province come from the Constitution.
Fantastic. And you have two questions here. So Shell, I'll let you go first, and then Kim, I saw your hand up. You can go after Shell.
Thanks for bringing this forward, Lorraine. I speak in favor of this proposal. It's long overdue. I'm wondering if you can give us any insight or update into what progress is actually being made amongst the diverse Indigenous peoples as to the creating of nations. That must be incredibly difficult.
Right. Well, I mean, this is an interesting question, and thank you, Shell. I mean, there's been a lot of development with the Inuit in the north, so they do have very progressive, governments, because of the way they were established, which is different from how First Nations are treated. So that's the challenge, is not looking at Indigenous people as a homogenous group, but recognizing that Métis and Inuit have their own histories, their own circumstances. But this would impact in First Nation communities primarily, right? Well, not exclusively, but primarily. What was the second part of your question? Sorry, Shell.
It was just in terms of the difficulty of it's lovely to say nation to nation, except that it's nation to nations,
Yes.
and there are so many, and
Right.
how practically, pragmatically, functionally we can accomplish this.
Right. So yeah, I'm thinking back when I started working within the Indigenous communities at the tribal council and the regional political territorial level. There was a lot of work ongoing with self-government. I mean, because we were just coming out of the constitutional talks, and there were resources available for self-government development. And we're so far behind when I think about how many years ago that was. There are projects going on within organizations that are, developing their own constitution based on a traditional governance style, such as the clan system. But those are small initiatives. There hasn't been, and I've seen the funding. I've gone to the website of the Minister of Indigenous Services, and they have money for development of governance systems, which, I think it's a huge undertaking, which would have to incorporate historical research on what kind of governance systems we had. Like, even myself as an Algonquin woman, I understand a bit about the history of my grandmothers and how they functioned within society, within a system. So how could we reorganize or reconstitute those governance systems as nations when we're divided by the Indian Act? So that goes back to the GPC policy to repudiate or to actually repeal the Indian Act. So there's so many constraints every time we try to move forward into nation building. We encumber or encounter some kind of barrier. So it's a long project to rebuild a nation that has been divided by, the Indian Act.
Listening to this, I'm wondering whether, in fact, it's an unrealistic plan that to target in that way gets in the way of achieving what's really wanted. and whether some form of the different nations or what currently exists to create a federation amongst yourselves within the boundary of what's known as Canada could then become an entity to which the nation of Canada could relate. Just off the top of my head here,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that, like, is the current plan actually not a disincentive, making it impossible to actually achieve what's wanted?
I don't think it's impossible to reconstitute nations as long as we all remember and we know who we are. Essentially, we have a sense of identity. We have a land base that, we understand. We have culture, heritage. So to be a nation, you have to have land, culture, language. Those are the three determinants of nationhood. And we know there are probably around 60 different linguistic groups in Canada, which leads me to think there may be 60 distinct nations.
Right.
Not the 600 that were created by, so Canada, if, Canada thinks it's difficult to deal with 630 Indian Act band councils, that could actually change into 60 different nations, which would
Right.
make negotiations, I think, a lot easier. But it's about setting up the structures that represent us. And we talk about the Green Party policy of electoral reform, because we know Canada's not governed by a representative democracy. And we've got a first past the post system, but then you're trying to put this first past the post voting system onto First Nation communities, and it's divisive. So there's a lot of pieces to this. If we ever want to move forward, we have to have a democratic process to select our leadership, just like Canada has to have a democratic process to select its leadership. So right now, I think the concepts within the Indian Act are divisive, and that's a barrier, making it difficult for us to move forward. So I think we know where we want to go, and we know what's standing in our way as Indigenous people. And we know Canada has to make the changes. So
I'm just going to jump in here because we're running out of time, and
so
Kim
sorry,
has been very patiently waiting. So Kim, I'll let you speak. I have one more question from another audience member and just one other comment that's just popped up. But Kim, can you ask your question, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that actually this whole discussion is pretty much where I was going as well, thinking about the unification of the nations, and seeing a couple of instances on Vancouver Island. One being it's called the Salish Leadership Group, I think, and it's comprised of the Sartlet, Sewoot, and Sikkim nations, those three, lobbying for resource management in the Finlayson Arm area. I can't think of the name I want, but anyway, so that's one. And then another one is, I think, the Esquimalt and Songhees people joined together basically to form the Lekwungen in terms of being able to further their interests and causes. So I think these smaller groupings are happening and working, and it just seems to me like that's where it, like you said, if you could get to the 60 nation place, that would be awesome. I would think. So just my 2 cents worth. And sorry if everybody's upset about all my changing of video screen, but I'm getting ready to do some EDA presentations in our debate for our nominees. And so this is sort of a working process for me to try to figure out my best lighting and my best position of my laptop. I now have it on 20 encyclopedias.
You look good. Don't worry.
I've been moving it around as we go, and I think this is the best yet. So thank you.
Fantastic. So Lorraine,
Nick, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what Connie, like if Connie's wants to ask her question. And I'm sorry about the time.
Yeah,
getting
no
away.
problem. Actually, what I'd like to do is pose a question that came to me, so nobody can see this. But Lorraine, do you know what kind of wording would be used in the constitutional changes?
Well, could you imagine a constitution that actually recognized the nations instead of calling them First Nations? You know, that Canada recognizes the rights of the, you know, the Cree Nation, they recognize the rights of the Mi'kmaq Nation, they recognize, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Like, could you imagine if they actually called us nations and named us?
Yeah.
So when they call us First Nations now, they're not calling us nations. They're calling us organized bands under the Indian Act.
Right.
Okay, perfect. So thank you, Lorraine. We are right at the 20 minute mark. So what I'd like to do is to run the poll, if that's okay with you. And again, if you have any other questions, feel free to stick around afterwards. If Lorraine has time to stick around, you can pose them then. So I'm going to launch poll number 2.
This is looking good.
There we go. And so again, I'll just read out the options. Green, I support this proposal. Yellow, I would like to see certain amendments. Yellow, I would like more information. Red, I do not support this proposal. And abstain, I will not vote on this proposal. And I'm just going to give a couple more seconds just to collect a few more results. And in the meantime, one question that was posed is, why not show poll results to all here? And the reason why I'm not doing this is I fully expect all these proposals to get a lot of support. And based on what I've seen, it has met my expectations. However, the reason why is, before I decided to do this, I wasn't sure what happens if I get that one proposal that's all red. Do I really want to propose, show those results? And that's why I chose not to share the results with the attendees. I didn't want to embarrass anybody in that rare event that we did not get the results that were expected. So I hope that answers your question. I'm just trying to have respect for the presenters who have invested a lot of time and energy into their proposals, which they see as their babies. And they're, you know, I don't want anybody to feel excluded or in any way feel less. So I'm just going to end this poll. Fantastic. So thank you very much. And now it's my turn. So I am just going to change the screen. So this is a little bit of a complex topic. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be reading from my notes. It'll take about half the time, and then I'll open it up for questions. And I see that we have at least one of my supporters here. So if they feel like chatting and adding their comments, I will invite them to do that as well. So I'm just going to reset my timer. And thank you, everybody. So the name of the proposal that I'm leading is called Safe and Accountable Firearms Ownership and Usage. And I'm going to begin by reading what's on the screen. So the Green Party of Canada acknowledges and supports Canada's safe and accountable firearms owners by transferring regulation of non-criminal activities from the criminal code to a responsive administrative regulatory framework, the collaborative development of clear and equitable evidence-based firearms control regulations, and the strengthening of laws which seek to reduce criminal firearms-related violence. So that's a lot. What does this mean? So this proposal recognizes that there's primarily two groups of firearms users in Canada. There are criminals who use firearms as weapons to threaten, intimidate, injure, or kill people. And then there are licensed firearms owners who use firearms as tools for activities such as competitive shooting. So for example, the Olympics, biathlon or target shooting, hunting, predator defense if they own a farm, target shooting, or even historical preservation, just antiquing and collecting old firearms. So currently, both of these groups are regulated under the Criminal Code of Canada. And these laws are designed by Parliament, interpreted by the Canadian courts, and enforced by the police. And in theory, this shouldn't be an issue. But in reality, Canadian gun control doesn't really work as effectively as it could. So the problems with those three elements, politicians are now using gun control as an issue to win votes rather than keeping Canadians safe. The courts try to interpret firearms regulations that are poorly designed and have to deal with logic flaws that are never fixed by the process of running legislation through Parliament. And finally, law enforcement doesn't administer gun control in an efficient or economical way. And I'll elaborate on this in just a moment. So this proposal seeks to restructure Canadian gun control so that these two, for the most part, distinct groups of firearms users are separated and regulated under different regimes. So criminals would continue to be prosecuted under the criminal code for violent gun crimes. But licensed firearms owners would be complying with safety and administrative requirements that were collaboratively designed by subject matter experts, which would include public safety professionals, mental health workers, victim right groups, academics, and even licensed firearms owners themselves. And all this hopefully would be administered in a very cost-effective manner. So this structural change would allow law enforcement to focus on real problems like gang crime, gun smuggling, and domestic partner violence involving firearms. And this new regulatory body that we're proposing, would address issues that are relevant to licensed firearms owners, but are totally ignored by politicians. So to support this proposal, the full text makes reference to academic studies, statements by law enforcement, news editorials, and government reports. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the evidence that we provided and explain the relevance so you can kind of get a sense of the story of what is actually happening in Canada with regards to gun control. And the first reference is a study, and the tagline is "A huge international study of gun control finds strong evidence that it actually works." And as a licensed firearms owner, I believe that gun control works and is necessary. And I want to make it very clear that this proposal isn't about having more or less gun control. The proper way to frame it is, do you want effective gun control or ineffective gun control? So, for example, between 2000 and 2016, there were approximately 13,000 firearms-related deaths. 75% of these were actually suicide. 20% was homicide. But when you listen to the news, everybody's talking about gang violence and gang crime and those kind of homicides, but more people are actually dying. Licensed firearms owners are dying from suicide. So if politicians were really interested in saving lives, they would be addressing the issue of firearms-related suicide, but they don't. And instead, we have something like the current Bill C-21, which is seeking to ban paintball and airsoft. So why aren't politicians consulting and working with mental health professionals and licensed firearms owners to save lives? The way how Canadian gun control is working right now, it doesn't have the right priorities. Mm-hmm. I wanted to highlight another example of how Canadian gun control doesn't really work. So in May 2020, so about a year ago, Trudeau introduced an order in council which banned assault-style weapons in response to the Nova Scotia shootings. However, he did so knowing full well that his own order in council would not have prevented the shootings because all of the shooters' firearms were either illegally obtained from the US. One of them was actually given to him because of a flaw in Canadian gun control. As the executor of the will for a friend that died who had a firearm, they gave him the gun as the executor of the will, even though he wasn't a licensed firearms owner. That doesn't make sense. Why wasn't this fixed? This is an example of stuff that isn't being taken care of. So, the order in council was so ineffective that the National Police Federation, otherwise known as the RCMP Labor Union, released a policy statement in November 2020, sorry, possessional statement in November of 2020, where they actually opposed the order in council. And I'm going to paraphrase what they said. Targeting legal firearms owners with costly legislation does not address criminal activity, illegal firearms proliferation, gang crime, illegal guns crossing the border, or the criminal use of firearms, and it diverts extremely important personnel, resources, and funding. So if the police don't even believe that this works and is actually going to be taking away from their job of keeping Canadians safe, why are these ideas being proposed? This has to be questioned. Another piece of evidence that we provide is an editorial, and the tagline is "Liberals, Tories lay groundwork for turning gun control into a wedge issue." So Canadian gun control, as it stands right now, is really designed to polarize Canadian society to win votes for the Liberals and the Conservative parties. The Liberals, on one hand, will court an anti-gun voting base, while the Conservatives court a pro-gun, anti-gun control voting base. And as long as gun control doesn't work, they have a captive market. So there's a huge opportunity here for the Green Party to step in and demonstrate policy leadership and implement logical gun control that is actually designed to protect Canadian society and not to exploit people's emotions. Another piece of evidence that I reference is the Auditor General's report from December of 2002, and it's called Costs of Implementing the Canadian Firearms Program. So the Canadian gun control in its current form is a hideous waste of taxpayer dollars. Remember, I'm not saying that I don't want gun control. I'm just saying how it's being implemented is a waste. So in 1995, the Department of Justice estimated that the Canadian gun registry would cost $2 million. In 2002, the Auditor General of Canada estimated that the cost would be $1 billion by 2005. And in 2004, CBC News reported that the actual cost was $2 billion. So they promised this thing that would only cost $2 million, and they somehow, I don't even know, how do you waste $2 billion? And that Auditor General's report also found that the way how things were reported to Parliament wasn't transparent at all. So what was the government's response to stopping to this? Well, they decided to just stop reporting the annual cost of the Canadian Firearms Program. So the latest figure I could find is that Canadian Gun Control, or the Canadian Firearms Program, which oversees licensed firearms owners, cost $80 million in 2008. We have no idea how much it costs now. Those billions of dollars could easily be used to support other things. Like a third of the water situation on First Nations reserves could be paid with the inefficiencies of Canadian gun control. So this is why we really have to take a look at what is being done. And finally, the last piece of evidence that I want to highlight, because gun control is very problematic, was a research paper that's entitled, "What Do We Know About Firearms in Canada? A Systematic Scoping Review." And this 2019 research paper from Western University reviewed firearms literature published in Canada between 2000 and 2018, and found that there was a significant lack of research to allow evidence-based policymaking. And a 2019 report for the Senate Committee on National Security and Defense also echoed this problem. Where are firearms coming from? What are the characteristics of these firearms? What are the characteristics of the victims and the offenders? How can you develop public policy if you don't have a clear understanding of the problem? There's not enough research to make good policy. And so this proposal invites subject matter experts to take the lead in developing effective evidence-based gun control that we don't have right now. And so in conclusion, I just want to say that adopting this proposal, the objective is to reset the Green Party's relationship and reputation with Canada's 2.3 million licensed firearms owners. But don't think that those 2.3 million are a group of others. we were actually part of the GPC this entire time. There are licensed firearms owners that support the Green Party right now. And I wanted to leave you with some comments that I solicited from the supporters of this proposal. Green Party policies target law-abiding gun owners and don't target criminals. We need strong policies that stop illegal gun imports and gang crime. Another supporter said, the hunting community is aligned with green values of sustainable resource management and wildlife conservation. We should have moderate regulation and enforcement of existing laws. So with that, I invite you to read the full proposal that is on the Green Party website, to reach out to me at smartguncontrol@gmail.com. And I hope that you'll vote green at the Bonsor vote so we can continue this discussion in August. And so with that, that's the end of my presentation. And I see that there are some messages that came in. So I'll start with that one. And the first one is, does this proposal contradict other GP policies or proposals? And it's a funny thing that this question was asked, because I had a complete critique of every single policy, and it was cut without my knowledge during the French translation period. Just how it works. But to a degree, I found as a licensed firearms owner, somebody that has lived experience, I found there's a spectrum of deficiency in every single policy. So some of them just absolutely did not make sense. Some of them were, yeah, it's great. It just needs a little bit of tweaking, and I think it will make sense. So I'll give you an example. One of the policies was we should ban assault weapons. Now, obviously, I don't want gun violence, but the question is, well, assault rifles has no legal definition in Canada. How can a government ban something that it cannot even define? Think about that conceptually, whether or not, replace it with anything that you want. You know, if you can't define and articulate exactly what you want to ban or endorse, how can you expect people to execute this policy? That doesn't make sense. So that's an example of most extreme. Or another example is we should ban high capacity magazines. There's already a limit on magazines. So generally it's 5 or 10 rounds. So this is kind of already dealt with in the criminal code. But even if it wasn't, what is high capacity? What is too much? How do you define that? And that's another challenge with these statements that we have. We need to look at what exactly are we looking to do? What is it conceptually? And then also, how would we execute this? And there needs to be a hard look. You can't have a policy and adopt a policy if you can't figure out how to implement it. And these questions have to be asked. So sorry, another one is, are there already gun policies? What I mean, there are, what I understand from the consolidated policy book, 2 sets. There was a recent consolidation, but then there was reference to the 1998 policies. So I actually critiqued all of them, which you cannot see, but I have them on another link that's available through Google Docs if people are interested. So yes, there is already gun policy. A lot of it I do agree with, and I just think it needs to be reviewed and potentially redrafted to align itself with this concept that I'm proposing. And again, I want gun control. For some reason, people just read this and say, like, you don't want gun control. It's like, no, that's not what I'm getting at. We just need to rethink how we do it. And now another question that came out was, how would the Conservatives spin this? And I would probably say, I would hope that the Conservatives would be very scared, because what we're doing is we're taking their empty promise and making it a practical reality. Because if you look at the Conservative platform, they say we want to remove exactly the first part. We want to take these nonviolent activities out of the criminal code. They don't mention creating a new administrative regulatory framework. That's a backdoor dog whistle statement saying we don't want gun control.
Right.
So they won't say that though, but we can read between the lines. So really what I'm doing is I'm taking their idea and actually making it real, because to have no gun control is stupid, straight up. It's full of logical flaws. For example, well, criminals will get guns, so we should have no gun control. Great. So right now they're just getting whatever they can smuggle in, and now you want them to make it freely available so anybody could walk in to any gun store, buy as much as they want at a price that's, they'll probably get a volume discount. That doesn't make sense. How is that making Canadians safer? And their response is either to make fun of me or to run away. I've never received an answer to this flawed logic, because it's flawed logic. It doesn't make sense. Their platform doesn't make sense. This having a replacement by moving certain elements out to support the activities of licensed firearms owners, this is what Canadians need. This is what the licensed gun owners want, but nobody wants to tackle this. Liberals are anti-gun. NDP has no gun control policy. And as it stands right now, the Green Party is actually hurting the people that they support. The licensed gun owners still vote Green, despite the fact that these policies are actually working against their passion. And I believe out of that 2.3 million pool of licensed firearms owners, we will get people who only vote conservative because they're the only people that are even contemplating supporting what they do. And in fact, I already got an email, 1 or 2 emails from people who said I would switch parties if you adopted this, because that's the only reason they support the Conservatives, simply because they were driven away. Otherwise, they align completely with the Green Party. So why are we pushing these people away with gun control policies that are flawed? I don't understand this. And this is the discussion that I want to prompt by introducing this proposal. Are there any other questions? I'm almost at the 20-minute mark, and I don't want to go over myself. Connie.
So I really like the concept in principle, but the thing that rings little bells are it's very non-defined, non-criminal activities and responsive administrative regulatory framework. Like, having worked in government myself and having had to change the regulatory framework for the Water Sustainability Act, that's a lot of work. So do you have any thoughts on how you would approach something like that?
No, absolutely. It is a lot of work, because this is a fundamental structural change. And you even have to go back to the British North American Act and take a look at the separation of powers between the federal and the provincial level. So, for example, I consulted with a criminal defense lawyer who specializes in firearms related issues, and we had a brief discussion about this. So yeah, this will challenge the notion of how we even deal with this at a federal provincial level. It's not going to be easy, absolutely. But at the same time, when you take a look at how it's done, for example, we have the Canada Health Act. Even though health is a responsibility of the provinces. So wait, how are the federal government still involved? Well, in a funding manner. So there are ways that I think if we're creative, we can take a look at the existing structure of Canada and work within the confines of the Constitution to develop something that will work. And I think part of it's going to be structured, but another part is simply going to be having people who are authentic about wanting to have effective gun control. Because as I mentioned right off the top, the way how we are structured right now, we pass laws, it's interpreted by the courts and enforced by the police. This should work, but it doesn't. Why? And it's because the leadership that's in charge have decided to use it for a different purpose. So part of it's structure. The other part is just having the right people. And that's where I want to have subject matter experts, people that are actually involved and related to be involved. And I want to give them voice. That's the problem. Like with the Order in Council, and I know I'm over, so I'm just going to cut myself off in just a second. But, you know, it wasn't even run through Parliament because I think Trudeau was afraid to raise the issue. So he just tried to do what Trump did and just sign the Canadian equivalent of an executive order because he was afraid to actually, you know, put this extremely flawed concept to Parliament and the Canadian public. So with that, I'm going to cut myself off and launch the poll. And to be quite honest, to go back to that question before about not wanting to embarrass people with red, based on my my interaction with the Green Party membership, it was really my proposal that was driving this. So I was like, I hope I don't get any reds. And if you do, don't vote honestly, please. If you do, but I hope that this is a bit more informative than a 3-sentence Facebook post on one of the unofficial community pages. So
Nick, if you could take a moment to speak to this, I think this is a really smart and well thought out and beautifully presented proposal. And it strikes me as not only as a proposal, but I would like to see it passed. And I think it would make a great platform. It differentiates us, and it has the capacity to grab people's imagination. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shell. I'll just throw in one quick comment here as I wait for the everybody to lodge their votes. There are 2.3 million licensed firearms owners. So imagine you captured only 1% of that. That's 23,000 people. If they all became Green Party members, you almost increased the party by 60%. And that doesn't even include their family and friends that they would convince as well. So there's a huge potential here. I am downplaying it based on the advice of some of the other supporters, because other people like to misinterpret it as we're inviting evil, racist conservatives, and that's not the point. We want to capture people who are essentially Green Party members who just can't vote because of the gun control, because there's no choice. That's what I envisioned. Whether it would work out is another question, but I will end the poll, and thank you very much.
Nick, I think Lorraine has an important question in the chat.
Oh, sorry. I had the poll over top of the chat window so I couldn't see. It says this proposal would have to make it clear it does not infringe on Indigenous rights. I apologize. Reference to Indigenous groups as being that part of the stakeholders was included, but again, a lot of our proposal was edited without my knowledge, so I kind of had to scramble to get content back in. So thank you. I don't want to keep talking about my proposal, to be fair to the other presenters. So what I'd like to do now is to talk a little bit about what's the next step for you as a Green Party member. So you need to vote in this Bonsor process, which is to help the Green Party identify what are the more viable and accepted policies, what needs some work, and what clearly needs more support before we take it to the general meeting. So what I'd like you to do is just check your email for your online ballot. So for example, on July the 12th, I received an email from the Green Party that says your ballot, 2021 Federal Council, Young Greens Council's elections and proposal prioritization. So in that email, you'll find a link, gpc.simplyvoting.com in the email. So click to open a login and enter the password that is included in your ballot email. And from there, you will see all of the voting options for the Federal Council, Young Green Council, and all 90 or so proposals for prioritization. So enter in all of your choices at this time, because there's no save and resume later. So for the proposals, like my poll, you'll get green, yellow. It's not broken into two. It's all combined into one, red or abstain. So when you've completed the entire ballot, at the bottom of the screen, you can hit continue. You'll get a chance to review your options, and then you'll submit. And that's finalized. There's no changes once it's submitted. And just so you have an idea as to what you would see, shameless plug here, I put in my own as an example. You'll see the name of each proposal, a link to the full proposal on the Green Party site. Now, before you click on this link, I log in, open a separate window, sign in first, or you're going to get an error message. So sign in first, and then you can click on the link and it will open to the correct page. And then you'll have the option to check off green, yellow, red, or abstain. Okay, and with that, what I'd like to do is I'd just like to loop back to Ian, Lorraine, and myself. And are there any final comments from our presenters? So Ian, do you have any last words, compelling arguments that you'd like to share with everyone?
I think this policy is pretty straightforward, speaking for itself. I hope folks will vote green on it and support Good Greens along the way is always great, but certainly I think this policy is pretty straightforward, and we're well overdue in Canada for something that is catchy for the public to jump on and say, be able to message their MPs and say, hey, we need this now, vote yes on this. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time today.
Thanks, Ian and Lorraine.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Nick. I want to say thanks for organizing this today. It's really helpful to see everyone's proposals and to have them explain it. It's something I'd like to see us do all year long. You know, not just in the crunch before BGM. So miigwech, everyone, and thank you for your dedication even on a Sunday afternoon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lorraine. As for myself, Shell, I do see your hand up. I will address that in just a second, but just for myself, thank you for your time. I hope that I've been able to convince you that gun control is seriously flawed in Canada. And even if you don't agree with my proposal, this is a subject where we have to have honest conversation. We really have to work on dispelling misconception. We can't operate in ignorance. For those who have no experience with firearms, I invite you to challenge yourself and ask yourself, well, with your positions, what is your basis? Is it based on just media and movies and the few snippets of TV, or is this based on consultation with people who are actually impacted by firearms? So even if you don't support this proposal, I hope this has at least prompted you to think about it and, you know, to just educate yourself more and just to engage in this topic in a more informed manner. So with that, Shell, actually, I'm going to just save your question for the end. What I'd like to do is just end the recording and be able to let people go on with your day. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say, so thank you for coming out. If you have any questions, please reach out to all the submitters. All the information is on the screen right now, so you can take down their email and more importantly, their proposal number and name, and hopefully you will support all of them. They are super fantastic proposals. I'm going to keep this meeting running for a couple minutes more afterwards, so if there's more discussion, but otherwise I'm going to end the webinar recording. So thank you for coming out. And if this is published online later, I'd like to thank the future viewer of this for taking the time to watch this recorded presentation. So again, thank you very much and have a good day.
My question might